All right, everybody, welcome back to day 20 of our Bible 365 reading with Kathy Carter. So, Bible 365 means we're going through 365 days of a Bible reading, reading Bible cover to cover. And I'm using a chronological plan, which means it's in a historical context versus going through each of the books as they're sitting in the Bible. So it will be a little bit mixed up. Although today we are on the book of Job, and the book of Job is going to go straight through. But in the past, in the Genesis, the book of Genesis, sorry, there have been some other things in there through Chronicles. But today we are on Job. This is our second day in Job, and we're in Job 5 through 7. So if you are with me and you are going through the chronological reading program, it is the 1 Year Chronological Bible, and the reading plan looks like this. So it's the 1 year name brand, and what they have done is they have gone through and they've broken it up into every single day into a little bit of a reading plan every day. You can find it online. I'm not affiliated with them at all, but I love this chronological reading plan. I've done a couple different ones, and for me, this one sort of makes the most sense. It actually also keeps me from getting stuck in, let's say, the book of Psalms for 200 Psalms. It really kind of broadens everything, and it opens up even the book of Chronicles. It breaks into smaller pieces. So you're not reading straight through a genealogy from start to finish, which would be like, maybe 5 or 6 chapters, which is difficult. It's a difficult read through. So this breaks it up in a way that I find the reading to be the easiest going through it historically and chronologically. So moving on from there, we are working on the book of Job. And so I'm really excited if you guys have stuck with me through the book of Genesis. And now we're moving to the book of Job. At this point, hopefully, we're gaining a little bit of momentum. And because now we've changed gears a little bit into a different story. So last week, yesterday, one of the things that we talked about was uh, where Job lived and probably the time period. And so the time period was likely not necessarily at the end of the book of Genesis, but I know that that's probably the easiest place to put it. It's likely that it was more during the time of Abraham and Isaac. Again, likely, we're not 100% sure, but the area that he lives in is the land of Uz, which, again, if we looked back in that chronology of Shem, the genealogical order of birth, Uz is like the grandson of Shem, and Shem is the son of Noah. And so Uz probably created a land, and Job probably lives in that land, the land of Uz, or before that, the land of Aram. So, saying that, we're moving on to the book of Job 5 through 7. And to be quite blunt, this is a really hard book for me to feel like I want to break down. One, I haven't really studied this book before. And so Genesis, I've studied multiple times and I was really able to dig in. I've read this book multiple times, but I really haven't done a whole lot of digging into it. And it's written pretty poetically. It's written in a poetic format. And so it's also extremely visual. So some of the expressions that they use aren't literal. He doesn't say things like, I hate you, God, right? So they're not literal expressions that he uses. It's definitely more poetic, and it's definitely more visual and more like a visionary type of expression. So there's a lot of rooting in and trying to figure out some of the meanings of the things that both Job and his friends are saying. And so it makes it just a little bit challenging for me. When I read it, I feel like I have a pretty clear understanding of what I think that the point is and what Job is trying to get at. But in speaking about it, it just definitely becomes a little bit more difficult. So just bear with me as we're going through this, and you may be having some of these same issues. You might not even understand why you're having some of these issues, why Job seems to be such a difficult book, but it's also a bit of a downer, which I know sounds terrible even as I say it. But when we first meet Job, we're meeting him because Satan has essentially decided to do all these terrible things to him. And he's doing all these terrible things to him because God has allowed him to do so. So it's a hard read. It's hard to understand. Um, So I think I'm coming to it of a place that I just find it to be a challenging read. Uh, if I go back to that day one, which we went to yesterday, it looks to me like God was not saying, please go do something to my guy Job, but he was saying that Job has everything. Have you seen him? Job loves me. Job loves me. He honors me. He worships me. He is blameless, and he pushes away evil, right? So we saw that about him. And then Satan says, well, of course he does. You protect him from everything. And so God sort of says, I'm going to take away my protection, and we're going to see what happens. It seems unkind, maybe. It seems unfair. And I think we're going to find that Job really feels a lot of those same things. And so let's get into a little bit of their conversation. What's happening is Job is there, and he's got his three friends there with him. They just started out kind of mourning together. And then what we're going to see is then Job starts this conversation where he's pretty upset. And then his friends start to respond. So Eliphaz was the first person that responded. And then, so if we move into Job 5, which is where we're starting today, Eliphaz keeps talking. So he keeps at Job, and he's talking a lot about. So one of the verses that I want to read is verse 3. It says, I myself have seen a fool taking root, but suddenly his house was cursed. His children are far from safety, crushed in court without a defender, on and on and on. So Eliphaz is talking about a fool taking root. And so I feel a lot of what Eliphaz is saying to Job is, this is about what you do or what you have done. And so the reason that you are cursed, the reason that, and maybe cursed is the wrong word, the reason that you lost all of your stuff and the reason that you lost all of your family is because you didn't do right by God. And so if you only do right by God, then you will get all your things back. You will be given plentiful. And so in verse 3, he's saying he's a fool, right? So he's saying that Job is a fool. And then in verse 6, it says, which I actually just want to refer back to Genesis here. It says, for hardship does not spring from the soil, nor does trouble sprout from the ground. Yet man is born to trouble as surely as sparks fly upward. And so, in my opinion, Eliphaz is going a little wrong here. First of all, he's going wrong by saying that there's anything we can or cannot do, and that is the way that we're punished or protected by God. That our outward doings are really what does that. And I'm going to argue that that is not what we see, and that is not what is true. And even God doesn't seem to say that even in the beginning here. But if we talk about the ground, hardship does not spring from the soil. That's if we going back to Genesis 3:17. I'm going to argue that in it itself is not true. So this is when Adam and Eve ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So they ate the fruit, and they were punished / cursed because of that action. So he had told them that if they did that, then they would die. They did do it. They disobeyed. They dishonored him. And then it says in verse 17, it says to Adam, he said, because you listened to your wife and ate fruit from the tree, which I commanded you, you must not eat from it. Cursed is the ground because of you. Through painful toil, you will eat food from it all the days of your life. So you're going to work hard to eat from it. It will produce thorns and thistles for you, and you will eat the plants of the field. By the sweat, of your brow, you will eat your food. And so it says hardship, and going back to Job, hardship does not spring from the soil. I'm going to say that that's not true. So we can see back in Genesis that hardship does sprout from the soil because of the fallen nature or the fallenness or the brokenness that the world is in now because of the disobedience of Adam and Eve. And so we do see some of that. I want to move on to verse 20 and 21. And it says, in famine, he will deliver you from death, and in battle, from the stroke of the sword. So what Eliphaz is talking about is he's talking about God. And he says, you will be protected from the lash of the tongue and need not fear when destruction comes. This is another untruth. There are times, even when we love and believe and have faith and follow God, tragedy happens. And so Eliphaz once again seems to be talking about, if you do, then this. And that's not true of God in these circumstances. So, as of Adam and Eve breaking the original rule, the world is now a broken place. The world is now cursed. There is now evil in the world. Satan is roaming the world. It even says in the first chapter, Satan's just been roaming around on earth. He's been walking around. So he's down here with us. He's whispering in our ears and he is manipulating us, and our own flesh is telling us that we want things that are not good for us, that are not godly. And so it won't always be the case that when there's a battle, we who believe are going to be the ones who win. We're going to succeed because we believe in God. And that's just not always the truth. And to be told that that's the truth really kind of represents putting out behaviors from us rather than changing some of the internal heart that's on the inside of just the recognition of who God is and what he has already given us. Moving down to and I know I actually am going to go up to verse 19. So I went down to 20 and 21, but I want to go up to verse 19 just to hit on this. This is another pattern that I've seen. It's a similar pattern that I've already talked about. From 6 calamities, he will rescue you. In 7, no harm will touch you. So again, we come down to this number 7 that seems to be popping up consistently in our scripture. All right, now I want to move on to Job 6. And in Job 6, Job now is responding. So he's replying to Eliphaz, who's given the speech, and now Job is responding to him. But I think what we're seeing here, Job is replying to him, responding that he is just completely miserable. And he believes that it's God. So verse 4 says, the arrows of the Almighty are in me. My spirit drinks in their poison. So he believes at this point that God has poisoned him. God has done this thing to him. And we can argue whether we believe that is or isn't true, but this is what Job believes. Job believes that God has done this to him. So verse 8 through 10, it says here, oh, that I might have my request, that God would grant me what I hope for, that God would be willing to crush me, to let loose his hand and cut off my life. So Job is begging for destruction. He wants his life to be over. So we saw that he was mourning in silence. And now we're starting to see a little bit of changing in pattern in him. He cursed, if you'll remember, he cursed the day he was born. So he cursed that day. Then he was hoping he had never been born. And now he is hoping that he dies. So he's going through these sort of, I guess, what we would call stages of grief. He's going through all this sadness and misery, which I always want to be very clear. Me as a human, all of that is very understanding. I'm not saying I don't understand or hear how Job feels, and I can understand how Job is and what he's talking about. But there is a lesson to be learned in that now he's just sort of proceeding in this pattern of getting worse and worse and going into a bigger and bigger pit in a cycle. And then he just basically says that his friends are not helping. His friends are sort of being the worst. Moving on to verse 15, it says, my brothers are as undependable as intermittent streams, as the streams that overflow when darkened by thawing ice and swollen with melting snow, but that stop flowing in the dry season and in the heat vanish from their channels. And so they're not helping him. They're inconsistent and they're not helpful. Water, obviously, if it's not there, is not helpful. And so they're not, when we need something desperately, it's not there. And so what he needs from them, he is not receiving from them. Going on to Job 7. So moving out, Job is still talking, but at this point, he's changed from talking to Eliphaz Eliphaz. Now he's talking to God. And so he was then just discussing stuff with his friends, and now he's reaching directly out to the source, and he's talking to God. Again, just talking about his sadness. And now I want to go to verse 7 where it says, remember, O God, that my life is but a breath. My eyes will never see happiness again. So he has made a pronouncement that he's done. Life is over. There will be no happiness left in his life. All of us as humans can say, I can completely understand that reaction. And yet God is still God. And so, yes, I think it's wonderful that he's crying out to God. Um, but I think that he's missing something here. I think that he's missing some of the joy in God. And I don't want to discount his misery because he's been through something I can't understand, but I also think that he's missing some of the joy in God. But he is reaching out. The eye that now sees me will see me no longer. You will look for me, but I will be no more. So he's trying to vanish. He's trying to be gone. All right, I want to move down to verses 17 to 22 because this can be used a couple of different ways. So he's very upset. And then he says, and this is, I want to use this directly in context because in context it says, what is mankind? Verse 17, what is mankind that you make so much of them, that you give them so much attention, that you examine them every morning and test them every moment? Will you never look away from me or let me alone even for an instant? If I have sinned, what have I done to you, you who see everything we do? Why have you made me your target? Have I become a burden to you? Why do you not pardon my offenses and forgive my sins? So here we go with him. Now he's starting to think what he did is the reason that things happen to him. So he's completely now meshing his actions with the repercussions of his actions, making it repercussions. We see in the beginning. So we know, because we're the reader, we know that that's not true. We know that this is just something that God allowed Satan to do. We know it doesn't have to do with his behavior. So we can see now that Job is in this spiral and he's thinking in his brain that it has to do with what his behavior was. So he says, what is mankind? Stop watching me. Stop watching my sins. Stop pointing out everything I do and then punishing me for it. And so I feel like that's the way that Job looks at it. Now, of course, we can look at it in a really good light as somebody from the outside looking in, recognizing that God does make so much of mankind. God does love mankind so much that he does see every single thing that we do. He does know what's in our heart. He does know when we sin. So he does know all of these things. And so we can recognize for our relationship with God that that this could be a really beautiful thing in our relationship with him. But right now he is so upset and he's so angry that he doesn't see this as a good thing. He sees this as a negative, so as something that's really bad. And that is where we end actually on the 20th. So we are over with today. And it doesn't end on a high note. And I'm afraid that tomorrow probably will not look much more upbeat than that, except that in knowing that God is in all of our details and God loves us and he continues to look over us and see everything that we do. So there are no small decisions that he doesn't see. There are no big decisions he doesn't see. There is nothing that he is not a part of. And so I believe that this could be a really great comfort to those of us who do love him, believe him, and follow him. And so that's what we can end on. We can end on a positive note in that direction. If you guys have liked this, please share it. Please subscribe to it. And please come back and watch again tomorrow. Hopefully you are reading along with me before you watch. And so you can read some of this and see where what you see when you're reading it. And I will see you next time.